So we're here on Angel Island with Derek David, our lovely composer and performer. And we just finished our first set, which I think went quite well.
Was beautiful, absolutely phenomenal. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you, it seems obvious that Yiddish language and culture is a huge part of your music. And could you maybe share with us a little bit about how it's interwoven into your art?
Absolutely. Yiddish is deeply interwoven into who I am as a human being. It's something that's been a part of my life since I was very young. I spoke Yiddish with my maternal grandmother. When I was very young, I didn't speak Yiddish. I spoke what I would call a zerbrochene Yinglish, or like a broken Yinglish. But that was always at the very center of who I am as an individual, and especially was the center of my identity as a Jewish person. And I felt that this was a part of my life, but didn't know this language. And it wasn't until 2017 that I decided to really devote my life to the study of the Yiddish language, and henceforth the study and the pursuit of all things in terms of Yiddish art. And so this was actually something that I always felt that I had in me, but that I didn't really know, as it's sort of distant and remote from sort of mainstream Jewish life. And as soon as that started to come in, it was really like something within me was blossoming and being born. And so the piece that you're playing, the Kaddish Quartet, is actually the first sort of specifically overt Jewish piece that I wrote, but I really felt like I had been, that type of thing had been playing within me my whole life. And so that was a big part of that piece, yeah.
Oh, it was a total pleasure for us to play, and I think it was very helpful for you to come in the other day and start to give us some comments, and because, I mean, I think looking at just the notes on the page, sometimes it's a little hard to pick out exactly what the flavor is. And I remember the one point where you were saying, like, I want it to be more spoken, this parlando, just like this kind of a dialogue sense. And I had in my mind when I was learning, is like I was thinking dance.
Oh,
so,
really?
yeah, which is why I was like, I'm kind of swinging along. It's like, no, it needs to speak more and stop and breathe. And then it's like, okay. So hopefully we're starting to get a bit of that.
No, absolutely. It was very much so coming through all that. Yeah, finding, it's interesting to find sort of like the speech patterns and everything, which, you know, they're not necessarily, if someone who speaks French or learns French, I should say, doesn't necessarily understand like the cadence of the French language, you know, and sort of like the cadence of the Yiddish language was like something that I had in my ear, but wasn't necessarily something that like was immediate, and it was something myself that I had to learn, like through time and my development through the language. And so like I was kind of, along with you guys, I was, you know, sort of equally a student in those gestures, and like how they, you know, how I learned them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I look forward to this piece continuing to grow and to become more idiomatic for us. See if I can get a proper Yiddish accent.
You guys play it so beautifully, and there's just so many, I felt moments that you completely understood and that you just completely, like, just got naturally. But that really speaks to who you all are as musicians and as a group and as a unit, and it was really phenomenal for me to experience that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And this is the second piece of yours that we're tackling. The first one, obviously, Good Night, Old World.
Yeah.
Which is this, we jokingly and lovingly say monster of a piece. It's like 50 minutes long for a clarinet and string quartet.
Yeah. That describes a monster, or describes a terror,
right. Yeah. How would you, I know you wrote them around the same time or close to each other, and could you describe maybe what connections they may have between the two pieces?
They're both in the same sort of, they're both speaking Yiddish, in a way. I think the difference between sort of the musical language of the Kaddish and the clarinet quintet is that the Kaddish is drawing upon specific melodies that are from field recordings, whereas none of that is in the clarinet quintet.
Okay.
That's all. Just, there's nothing in there. Well, except for like a 10-second passage, but it's not like the genesis of the material. And so they're both sort of both pieces, and I think just a lot of my music in general. They come from a very dark, sort of secluded place, and they're both coming from that place of grief and fear. The clarinet quintet is certainly more about an existential sort of terror of life. And whereas I feel like at the end of the string quartet, I would have described it as sort of like a burdened freedom that can be discovered. There's no such thing after that entire the entirety of that 50-minute monster. At the end of the 50-minute monster, you're only left with anxiety. Yeah. You're only left with terror and fear. There's no. It's hardly an exercise even. It's just a constant, therapy session, I guess you can say, in doing that. But yeah, there's no redemption in the quartet. But here, there's maybe more of a realistic one.
Yeah. There's also there's a little quote in the Kaddish from the Brahms violin sonata.
Yeah.
And it's when we first heard it, we were like, oh my God, that's from the D minor violin sonata.
Yeah.
But it's fairly well disguised, or just in the context.
Yeah.
What's your inspiration for that quote?
Well, I feel very close to Brahms. I feel that I'm very much so in a deep dialogue with him and his music has been very influential to me growing up, and especially like in my student days here in San Francisco at the conservatory. I felt I became very intimately acquainted with a lot of his music. And I think that when I became acquainted with that piece in particular, it made a very deep sort of relationship with a specific type of sort of grief and sort of sadness. And so it comes sort of fractured at the end of the piece, sort of rising out of this a frantic hush or a frantic whisper.